Welcome to the Data Science Hangout. I'm Rachel Dempsey, your host for today. And welcome back to all the familiar faces I've seen here the past few weeks. But for anybody who's just jumping on for the first time, there's no agenda for these sessions. It's really just focused on questions that are most important to you all. So you could jump in live or put questions in the chat. And we do also have a Slido link. So if you want to ask any anonymous questions, you can do that as well. And Robert, I'll have you put the Slido link in the chat if that's okay. And just a heads up though, this session will be recorded. So we'll share the recording up to YouTube. And then we take some helpful 2-minute snippets and share those up there as well. But I'm joined by my co-host for today, co-host and friend from the Boston USAR group, Bryan Butler, who's a VP of Business Insights and Analytics, and has been on a few of these sessions so far. But Bryan, I'd love to have you introduce yourself and maybe share a bit about your team and the work that you do.
Sure. Hey, thanks, Rachel, and thanks everybody for joining up. So I have a very small team of two, myself and one other sort of junior data scientist guy. We support pretty much the whole organization, and we're in the early stages. So company has only been doing something like data science, and I won't call it completely data science, for only about 18 months. So it's really getting started, and mostly focusing on supporting the marketing department. But I do a lot of work for our president and the board, and we're trying to just really get started with innovation. How do you use data science in these traditional type roles? And one of the things I just want to talk about that is I often see on LinkedIn, how do I get a job in data science? How do I get started? And I always tell people it's easier to bring data science skills to a regular job in marketing, ops, finance than it is to get that first job listed as a data scientist. And of course, everybody's always going for your famous tech companies and everything else. So those jobs are even, more 1 in a million, more lottery ticket type stuff. So that's a little bit about what we do. So my career has been the most direct path you can get into data science. Started in the military, worked in chemistry, then went into insurance as a quant and risk trader. Ran my own business for a while as a restaurateur, was an independent contractor, and then got into data science. So as you can see, it is the most direct route, as I always tell people. And
I didn't know you had a restaurant.
Huh?
I said I didn't know you had a restaurant.
Yeah, I left the corporate world in 2010. After actually we had lived in Bermuda for a couple of years. That's why I was doing the risk trading. Came back, did a year in the corporate world, one more year, and I was like, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of the commute. Let's chase a passion, and our passion was food and wine. So that's what we did. We took a departure and did that for a couple of years, actually. And I would never do it again. People come up to me and say, "Oh, that's so exciting! I really want to do it." I'm like, "No, you don't." And even now, I think about it now, and with COVID and everything, I'm not sure my business would have survived. It was hair raising and white knuckle enough without COVID going on back in 2010, 11, 12, 13. So I really feel for the people in that industry and what's going on out there, and understand what they're really going through. And it's hard. But I think one of the things that's been key to all of this, and when I look back at it, is this passion for learning. And even now, I'm literally constantly taking classes and learning. I think I'm enrolled in 4 online classes now, and I actually am enrolled in a curriculum for computer vision, which is great because we start from ground zero. And it came from along the way I became obsolete, and it's kind of scary. And it was after my restaurant business. So I was like, all right, let's get back into the corporate world. Let's do some stuff. And I just finished some contracting work also, but there was a big break, and I was applying for jobs, and people were like, "Do you know R? Do you know SAS?" And I was like, "No," but I could do the job as it stands. Like you know, it was the jobs insurance industry, so it's like, yeah, I know the statistics, I know the actuarial, I know your specialty lines. I used to, you know, run the products and things like that, but people were just like, "No, we need a modern skill set," and it took me about 8 months to find that job. Um, and and it was scary. I'll be honest with you. It was just you know, this sinking feeling. And you know, I've talked to people about it along the way that are going through the same thing. Um, and but you know, I did that. I actually took the Coursera curriculum from Johns Hopkins, the R course, which is, I think it's like 12 courses or something like that, and crammed through it in about 3 or 4 months. And that's what landed me a job. Um, to be able to go into an interview and talk a lot more about that. And it was with a startup. So it was a sort of I call it my first step to reintroduction to the corporate world, and that was back in 2014.
So you think that it was primarily the languages that you started to learn through Coursera that helped, or were there
Yeah,
other pieces from, like, I can imagine you have a very unique skill set from all these different experiences.
it was. It was a couple of things. So there was a lot of that experience because it was actually an insurance startup. But I was totally not hired to do that at all, which is kind of funny. That's not what they were hiring for. But I think taking the courses helped connect all the dots that I had spent the last 12 years doing. You know, I took PhD level courses in time series when I was in graduate school. So I had that time series background and used it a lot. I think it's one of the most underutilized or under-focused skills out there, like real-time series, not just, oh, I use Facebook Profit or I use Auto ML and it spits out some results. And understanding that, you know, the funny thing was I was doing predictive analytics for a while, and it was actually data science. Like I was using, you know, linear regression and doing data holdouts and logistic regression. So when I was talking to these guys in the interviews, they're like, yeah, you've done all this. You're doing all this stuff. And I was like, well, I use the R language. And one of the guys that was an interview, he was, yeah, hugely into R. He's a good friend of mine still to this day. We still geek out every once in a while, but it definitely moved the needle and it made it happen.
I see Alyssa had a question, and Alyssa, feel free to jump in and introduce yourself as well. But a question around, was that Coursera R series from Jeff Leake?
Yep, that was the three guys from Johns Hopkins. Jeff was one of them, and I can't remember who the other two were.
Basically, my favorite people on the planet.
That's awesome.
I learned a huge amount, and that's actually almost before the Tidyverse days. So I learned it a lot through like base R stuff. And so now I'm a hybrid. And I see discussions on LinkedIn. Oh, are you Tidyverse or not? Blah, blah. I'm like, you know what? It's like everything in life. Use the best that works. Don't box yourself in. You know, same thing with Python and R. I use both. In fact, I'm a huge fan of Reticulate. I use it all the time now because R Markdown is the best way to present. So I'll mix and match R and Python to do a lot of my presentations using sort of the web-based tab format in R Markdown. And it just gives you so much more freedom. And so I tell people, don't box yourself in. If you think about a carpenter, you know, they have like 4 different nail guns, one for a different thing. You have 3 different saws. It's the same thing. Languages are tools. Even knowing a little C++ or, other languages, it all fits together. You will find that one day you're going to reach for that tool and use it when you least expect it.
So I know you're starting to build up this new team as well. So I'm curious, what's something that you're most excited about in terms of data science and building this team?
One of the things that I'm a big NLP person. I think a lot of people have found that out, and that is changing almost daily, it feels like. Just when I was getting, good at TensorFlow 1.0, and then 2.0 comes out, and that changes everything. And then, improvements in neural networks, and then all of a sudden transformers come out, and that changes the whole game. But you got to be able to apply it, and I think that's one of the biggest things. Like, there's some people, oh, wouldn't it be cool if that's what your project starts out as? It's not going to be successful, especially in a business environment. It's more about, can you solve somebody's problem? And about 6 months ago, we were able to do something with NLP, which was take all these fancy models and tools, weave them together with our markdown, and actually give my CX guy a visualization tool of comments. And so it took all the comments, ran them through a bunch of different processes. But at the end, he had like this 3-dimensional interactive visualization that color coded the comments by theme. It used dimensionality reduction to get the first 2. And then one of the scales was sentiment. And you could just spin this thing and flip around and find out, you read the clusters of what people were saying. And it was really interesting because it was so easy to really see what's going on now. And so that, that was like a really first move for the bank, for people to see something, completely different that they'd never seen before, anything like that. But with doing those things, there's a challenge too, because you got to teach people about something that they've never seen before, and a lot of people aren't comfortable with that, and especially in sort of I'll call these older traditional industries, like think about banking and insurance and some of the other ones. No one wants a revolution. They can't handle it, and it's just too much change. But they can handle incremental steps. You give it to them a little bit at a time, and maybe in 2 years you'll find yourself down the road a lot further along. And I think that's the way you gotta look at it with industries like that. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not going to happen in 6 months or whatever fast timeline you read about, or Google or Facebook's doing so on. You're not them. We're not them. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's about focusing on the basics first, like data. The company before I was at the bank, we were in healthcare. I was in the healthcare industry, and they formed a core analytics team and everything else. We spent 2 years building a data warehouse. That's what they focused on, and it was the right decision. We hired data engineers, and getting everything so you have one single source of truth. Because the biggest way to lose credibility with your executives is you come in and say something and show them some data, and they say, I saw something else elsewhere, and now you got a problem. And so we focused on making sure that didn't happen. And then you can actually do data science when the data engineers are building you data models and everything else. Then it's easy. Like, you don't want people writing custom SQL because everybody writes it differently. And do you get the right results? Like, the importance of data engineering is not stated enough out there, because that is the ultimate foundation.
What does that process look like? So I know you say you show them in incremental steps, but does someone come to you with a question first, or?
Yeah, so it's all about, like I said, solving that business case. So somebody says, hey, I got this survey in a class one, because I did a year in market research also, and kind of revolutionized that in a way. They're like, hey, I have some survey data. Can you analyze it for me? And so from there, to me, there's two aspects of it. You're not going to do that much machine learning in it, which is good. There is a little bit you can do if the survey is designed right. But then it's also just bringing better visualizations. And like traditional in marketing, as you hear, top two box. And I'm like, no. You use all of your data. So like, if people, for a question, they score you 1 to 5, 1 to 10 or whatever, you show that as a violin plot or something like that that shows the full distributions of everything. And people are, wow, I'd never seen that before. But at the same time, you got to be able to talk, you got to be able to explain it to what they're looking at too. So I think, and that goes back to, you can't give them too much change at once, because you'll get hung up explaining everything and you'll never get anywhere with the actual, what did we get out of this survey kind of thing.
Rob, I see that you raised your hand.
Yeah.
Do you have a question?
Yeah. Hey, Bryan, nice to meet you. If you are just starting a data team or you lead a small data team, what is the timeline that you should be thinking of? I guess in terms of really tackling big projects or like doing the things that executives or non-data scientists probably think that a data science team should be doing at an organization.
I think you gotta tackle the problems that are in front of them right away. And for instance, I think your timeline is a year, but you got to deliver pieces along the way. So one of the things that we've been working on, I've been there about a year, and early on it was the customer lifetime value model, and we're making our progress through it, and we're delivering the first real chunk, which is, and it sounds like a basic part of it, but we're actually we've shown everybody, like, these are the lifetimes of all your segments, very much like a survival analysis, because you can't do anything else with lifetime until you know how long people live, sort of like how long do the customers hang around. But we've delivered little pieces every few months along the way to let people know we're working at, we're giving them the easy low-hanging fruit while we work on this big strategic issue. And that's the thing. So you have to have two timelines. You have the strategic timeline, which is 1 to 2 years. And then you have your every few months where you deliver, just even if it's a simple visualization, as long as it's different and as long as it's useful. But it all depends on the organization you're in too. Some organizations can handle it faster, and others, it just depends on what they're used to seeing, I think. So, because sometimes you get into just show me what I've always seen, don't deviate, and that's a difficult place to be in. But the other thing, one thing about my career is, because it's a little older, I was often that first guy doing data science. I was 6, 7 years ago, I was the first person in this marketing research firm to transform their analytics from manual Excel small data to algorithms, and understanding, like, there are statistics involved, and so you can't just put an average out there and assume it represents the data set. And I think the first thing I did for them was like a linear regression. And it's, I think to anybody that works that's a data science background, to think, yeah, but that's basic. But not everybody uses it. People don't use that every day. but it is extremely powerful tool. And I think I would say along with that is keep it simple if you can. Like, I know too many people solving a problem, first thing I want to do is run an XGBoost model. Like, throw all the data in the soup and let's run an XGBoost model. But you're never going to be able to explain that to somebody. And so if you can do a simple regression, you know, even if you think about a scatter plot as a visual with a regression line through it, you've done a regression for that. And people get that. And I think that's where you start. My big thing that the marketing research firm was doing that. And also I brought text analytics in. And that's where I first got involved. We had, I mean, as a marketing research firm, surveys and open ends are your lifeblood. And when I was talking to people, they're like, well, we take a sample of about 100 or 200, and then we try to do it all by hand. And I was like, so you're throwing out 90% of your data? And they're just kind of, yeah. I was like, well, no, we can't do that. And the thing about that role was because I was the new person, you know, people didn't know what I did. You get a chance to define your role a little bit. And that's why I say bring your data science to a traditional role, because you might be able to redefine it along the way and make it what you want it to be, more than just I'm doing what everybody's always told me to do. That's completely not me. I'm not one of those people that even though I was in the military and an officer and everything, even back then I didn't do what everybody always told me to do. So I definitely wasn't going to do it then. You know, you're going to get resistance, and that's okay. Not everybody's going to take your idea the first time.
Yeah. I really like that point you made earlier about like people don't really want a revolution right now, so you have to show them like each step. But I'm thinking about like the way you're doing this today at the bank, or how you've done it previously in insurance. Like say it was text analysis. Like how do you go about communicating that to people, or like what are the people skills you've learned along the way of showing them these things?
You gotta start really simple, and I'll use an example of doing that. So early on in my career, literally almost 20 years ago, in insurance, I was doing a commercial property rating plan for them, and the data didn't work for like, how much credit do I give somebody for a deductible? I mean, think about that. Like if I take a $500 deductible, I get X off, and if I take $1,000, and this was commercial property, so you're talking about $5,000, $10,000, $1 million deductibles. Data didn't work at all. And so I was like, all right, I got to do something, you know, failure isn't an alternative here. And I did something from my finance days called an option model. And at the end of the day, an insurance contract is a call option. And what a call option looks like, there's something called a payout function. It looks just like a hockey stick. So you have a straight line, and then when the loss exceeds your deductible, the insurance company starts paying. And it's literally like I spent 6 weeks describing a hockey stick figure for people, and explaining the concepts. And you know, I'd go back and forth, and you know, I'd show it to them 5 different ways. But I spent 6 weeks just selling that idea without even crunching a number. It was selling a concept, and you just can't get frustrated. Like you just got to be really open. And then at the end of that, as you got to read people too. Like as you get a little buy-in, like you get the acknowledgement, hey, I understand this. Then you give them a simple example that they can work on. And I did that. Like I took one of their accounts and you know, with data that they had seen from somebody else. That's the other thing, is you got to use something that they're comfortable with. And so we just had a broker in, and the broker explained, here's the standard deviation of your portfolio. And I was like, yeah, you remember that? And they were like, yeah. So you keep it familiar. It was very simple until it took me 4 or 5 months to sell that idea from, I don't have any data to do this with, so we're kind of screwed at this point. And now I'm gonna get creative of outside the box that nobody's ever seen anything, and I'm gonna have to figure out how to sell it. And at the end of the day, it's in there. It was filed in all 50 states, and this whole methodology that I sort of developed for it. And I've run into people in my past down the road, and they're like, yeah, I took that idea. Like, I have that rating plan, or I have that in my plan, and it's moved to other people's companies. So it's just kind of funny that how that can happen along the way.
That's great. And just a reminder for everyone, feel free to jump in live with any questions you have, or put them in the chat or Slido as well. But I'm happy to keep asking you questions, Bryan, if there are any others.
That's fine, yeah.
But I know we've mentioned this before on one of these, and I saw maybe a post on LinkedIn, because I know you get really excited about like NLP and actually like trying new things. And how do you balance that with being a leader and not getting to do as much of what you may think is the fun stuff?
Yep. That's it's I just had that conversation with my boss the other day. It is a tough balance. Like, so I've always been, and even from the days in the military, like, you can't just be a leader, and you can't just be the doer either. As a leader or manager, you got to figure out how to wage it. At my level, you got to figure out how to do both. And I think I remember one of those last ones, like the one was like, she's like, I don't work at my keyboard anymore. And I do still, so I do both. I also do a lot of code reviews with my junior guy. And it's, hey, your code's not efficient. And we kind of walk through certain ways, or have you ever thought about doing this way? On the real exciting stuff, like, I try to do like a little piece somewhere, like the NLP thing. So that whole 3D visualizer thing, it was one of these. I had a couple days in between all these other projects. I'm like, I'm just gonna bang this thing out. And sometimes you end up working at night and all the other stuff, but I was like, it was part of it for me too. So that was the way I was able to really bring that in, and I was really excited to show a lot of people about it, because it actually opened doors for me. I hadn't worked with transformers before, and Google Universe's sentence encoder and all these other things, and the visualization all of a sudden just came to me one night. And I was like, oh, we can do this in 3D with sentiment. And because everybody in NLP talks about sentiment, like, okay, that's fine, but what are you going to do with it? And for us, it was actually an axis and a plot, and allowed you to all of a sudden take thousands of comments, visualize them on this plot with scaled by sentiment. And it was like, and then when we color coded them by themes and everything else, you could really see where the clusters of the topics were. But going back to how do you balance it, it's not easy. You got to make an effort, and at the same time is you got to manage upward. Part of it is working with your manager, saying, hey, I feel like for the last X amount of months, I haven't been able to deliver some of these things that I know are important, because we're focused on fighting the fires. And so it's just having that conversation so they understand, because you don't want to get to the end of the year and somebody says, what have you done? Or why haven't you done this? Like, that's disastrous, I think, for a lot of people. So it's this constant checking, hey, this is what we're working on, you understand this is important. And I actually keep a Jira board for my team. I know most people use it for software development and everything else. I use it for, these are the projects that are hot. And it was funny, Freddie Drennan, who's a good friend of mine, I don't know if you've probably seen him on LinkedIn, and he's big R guy. He actually taught me it, because people were just throwing like it became at one point like the only thing that you can think about is what's due in the next hour. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't handle this. Like, this is not, this is just too much stress. And he showed me how to do the board. And so, because then you can show someone, I've got these 10 things. You've added 11. It's not going to get done. So which ones are we moving? And you have to, like, being a manager and a leader, you have to have those conversations, like, or your people will get killed and they will leave. And that's just one of the, I think that's one of the biggest things I took away from the military is how to manage and lead people that, you know, when I was fresh out of the academy, a junior officer, and next thing you know, they're like, oh, you're in charge of people that got 15, 16 years experience. And, you know, understanding that dynamic and how do you manage those people is critical. And one of the things as a manager and a leader is you have to be a buffer for your people. You got to be the person that's between them and the rest of the organization. And I've seen so much bad management over my career where the manager is either an amplifier and turnover just goes through the roof, or that's the worst case if you're an amplifier of all the noise out there for people, or you're just a pass-through, which means you're not even doing anything to deflect from your folks. And then the expression that comes along with that is you can delegate your authority, but you can't delegate your responsibility. So if something goes wrong, a project goes wrong from one of the people that work for you, it's on you as the manager and the leader. You have to eat it. You have to own it. You don't pass the blame. You know, you can have a talk with that person in private down the road, but when you're in that conference room or whatever else, that's your responsibility. You take it. And so I think that's the part of leadership and management that often doesn't get talked about. You know, people are like, oh, I organize teams and I do all this kind of stuff and code and everything else. Yeah, but there's a real human responsibility portion of it that it's just not taught. I think that's the biggest part. Like, you can't teach that in a traditional university. You can't go to a seminar on it. I mean, for me, I got it drilled into me for 9 years in the military, so it's not like something you learn overnight.
So how do you get better at those things if you're not in the military?
One is you get your first axiom is take care of your people. That's the first thing. And so you got to constantly ask yourself, am I taking care of my people? The other, and another little, I hate using some of these sometimes, but it's a really good expression. So we used to say, managers do things right, leaders do the right thing. And so part of it is you're going to have to step out of your comfort zone as a leader. And that's one way to practice. But be smart about it. You know, it's kind of like, I tell people, I think outside the box. I live outside the box, but at the same time, as I make sure I don't get completely smoked too, because you can't live out at the end of the limb the whole time, because someone will cut it off on you and you will go crashing down. But yeah, so how do you practice that? You just gotta find those small opportunities, whether it's and you usually find it when something doesn't go right. Like, I think that's what really defines people, is when something just doesn't quite go right. How do you handle it? And the key is to not be instantly reactive. And I'll be honest, when I was a lot younger, I wasn't that great at that part. Like, I would react right away. I'm not going to say I was an expert, but I was actually very good at making sure my people were taken care of. Sometimes it was costly to me. I'll be honest. You don't always win. Management doesn't always. You don't always look good in management, but I could sleep at night, and I think that was at the end of the day, is I felt good, comfortable with my decisions, and my people liked me, and they expressed it.
When you mention like, okay, well, you have all these fire drills that come in, and now you use Jira, and now you can see how everything's organized. Do you use I can't remember what blog post I was reading, but someone mentioned an intake request form. Like, do you use some sort of request from the business? Like, how do those questions get funneled into that process?
We don't have a formal way to do that. And I don't want to go down that route because it becomes adding a layer of bureaucracy, which I absolutely hate. So a lot of it for me is, yeah, we'll write it all down. And then I'll have a meeting with my manager, and we'll kind of prioritize some of the projects. Because if, part of the role is that, I'm doing work for everybody else, but we got to fit everybody in a priority queue. And that's a common, or a way to, when you have these like center of excellence type data science teams, versus I think it's harder to do that if you're a data scientist embedded in you're the finance data scientist, or you're the ops data scientist. I think you can still do that. You can still manage it, but it's a little harder to be able to prioritize people. But at the same time, I don't want to get into this. Fill out this form, send me a request, I'll figure it out. Here's my SLA for you.
Mandra, I see you just came unmuted. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, I love the fact that he talked about leaders and managers. But for me, I mean, I was in a situation where the leadership role, I was taking it on because I was trying to do the right thing. And the manager, he was trying to do it right, but it was like a conflict because I didn't want to fudge numbers, that it comes to that integrity, right? Yep. So yeah, that was a nice remark. I love that.
Yeah, you don't. That's your. Those are harder ones, and you never do that, like, because you can't get it back. Once you lose that integrity, or once you go down that step, like fudging numbers and stuff, there's no coming back from it.
It's sad. I mean, it's sad, like especially even now with all this going on in the healthcare. I think that's the of utmost importance, trying to align things right for the whole country.
Yeah, and I mean, I've gotten into it with managers. I mean, when I was in the military, I actually told I was a lieutenant, which is pretty junior officer, told admirals where to go, because I wasn't going to do, or I've told senior people, no, I am not going to do that. And I mean, in work environments, I've left jobs because of that. Sometimes it's just,
correct.
You just got to walk away. And my career has had a lot of companies and a lot of jobs and everything else. And sometimes it comes down to stuff like that. And I am not going to be a part of that. I'm not going to hang around, because it will destroy you, and it won't really get you anywhere.
Correct. And I mean, hats off to you, Bryan. There was just one manager who I worked for. He was in the military too. So I truly understand your take on this. Thank you.
You're welcome. No, it's
and
hard.
There's a similar question that came in anonymously, but do you have any suggestions on how to have a conversation with a manager who is an amplifier or refuses to accept responsibility?
you have to find a moment when it matters, right? So it has to be, again, something has to go really wrong, and you got to find that way to have that conversation. My first job as an officer on a ship, my chief engineer and I didn't get along. Like, it was miserable. Like, everybody knew it too. And so, you know, it was either I'm done, you know, I'm 6 months into my career for the next 5 years, got to solve this. And so I took a gamble and knocked on the door and said, "Can I talk to you?" And we had we had probably one of the most difficult conversations. And this was so early in my career, but it turned everything around. But it was a risk I had to take. And I think you can do that with, you can make that decision. Do you have that do you knock on the door and have that conversation? And the other thing is, if it's not going well, end it. Like, don't stay in there for the fight. Like, don't stay in there because you have to be right or whatever else. So, you know, you got to be able to know that, hey, this isn't working. But the best thing is coming off fresh off a bad experience or something like that is the only way you'll be able to get there on common ground to be able to talk about it. And you know, sometimes you take responsibility for it too, and that's a good way to start that conversation. Hey, I know this really didn't go well. This is what I felt. And you know, try to get discussion and not conflict. But it's not easy. I'll be you know, those, it's never easy.
Thank you. Maybe switching gears a little bit, I see there's a few questions that came in when you were mentioning how you use R and Python together. Yep. And Rick, I see you asked a question about challenges and successes for using the two together. Do you want to add any additional context to that?
So for me, all right. I thought it was to Rick.
Oh, it was.
Sorry. It was. I was on mute.
I was giving you a second to jump in.
Sorry, I didn't notice I was on mute. Yeah, I was saying I was really happy that you mentioned combining different tools and using them to the full effect in a synergistic way. I imagine, like R and Python and Base and Tidyverse. I still don't understand this purism of like 100% Base or 100% Tidyverse and not just doing the thing that works, right? I get my people to always, however they intuitively understand it, as long as they get something done is better than trying to get fraud and spending days trying to get something to work in one specific way. So I just published this book with O'Reilly, the R and Python together for the modern data scientists. And I was very happy to hear that you're doing R and Python. I was wondering if you can mention an example where you did that and where you really had a challenge, because I think it's something that is hard to convince other people in the team or the managers to combine languages, especially for the support network. And also something where you had a success in combining R and Python. And if you've ever used the Python package, the RPy2, to go in the opposite direction, if you've had success with that.
The easy one is I have not used RPy2 to go the opposite direction. So so I had this project at the last company. It was to do time series forecasting for like 10 different metrics for a leadership team. And I loved R for time series, but it wasn't giving me the visualizations that I wanted. And maybe it's the way I was looking at it. But for instance, like the whole backtest model. So you take your model and then you backtest it on all your data and see how it compares with the existing data. I had done a lot of work with Python time series, and it seemed way easier to do stuff like that. And I actually built a module that I have on GitHub, a module that does all sorts of time series functions for you. using stats models and everything else. And so I took the Python for the time series part and R for the visualization side of things, because matplotlib just doesn't cut it, and
Yeah.
Seaborn's okay, but
well, there's some nicer packages. There is one which is very similar to ggplot2. It has a funny, I keep forgetting the name of it, but it tries to emulate really even the syntax of ggplot2, and it's a very minimal version, but it is something. I have to look up the name for it. I haven't used it for a while. So you would say that Python is better for time series than R, or was it only in this specific instance? Would you have rather used R?
It was in this specific instance because I had to convince people that these models are accurate. Now, how do you do that? Well, you show it to them. You show them, hey, here's the model, and it was really cool because my boss had to go explain it to the CFO, and so it was easy for him because they could see as the model moves through time, it was actually learning. And so, the first couple of data points, there's a lot of variance, and then it sort of hovers in. And eventually, it begins to pick up all the little bumps and grooves in the time series. So that visualization piece of it, and then I used ggplot to do all the plots with ggplotly, which is great because one line converts a ggplot into an interactive plot, and that's what this thing was too. And then I wrapped it all up in R Markdown, using the DT package for charts, so people wanted to export the Excels and all this other stuff. And it really wrapped it all together pretty nicely. So like we had this little app that I would build every month, and it would show, here's this month's forecast, here's last month's and how it performed, and here's the month's before, because we were doing 3 months out. And so they could see all 3 of the lines against existing data, and you could see, and it also had the back test of the model. The only way this was going to get done was between the two of them. Otherwise, I would have had some build some crazy, app and I don't know, React or something like that to get it to work. But R Markdown, you just knit the code up, and with Plotly, the next thing you know, you've got an interactive application that goes in the web.
I love just making a shiny runtime in a Markdown document and not even using the full thing, just having it in just little snippets, and it's so incredibly easy. But maybe I want to just, as an aside, because it sounds like the issue with the R thing was something that I sometimes encounter, which is that the tidy data, the long version, is sometimes so unintuitive because it's such a machine readable format than a human readable format that I've had one case where a student I had just tons and tons of data from brain scans and just different regions and tons of different slides, and he had this massive table and he had to put into tidy, and it was like, I don't know, millions of rows and very, very long and thin, and he was like, what are you talking? And then when I got him to understand the pivot longer and wider, he was like, okay. And then everything clicked, and then he was able to do everything immediately, efficiently. And I wonder sometimes, you duplicate data sometimes, which is a very unintuitive, weird thing to do because of just, you need to, for making the plot. Like if you want the baseline to be on every plot, I mean, maybe I don't know how to do it correctly, but I would then copy it so that it's on every facet of the plot, for example, so that every section is there. I'm sure there are better ways of doing it. So maybe was it something like that? Is that why you couldn't get R to do what you wanted with the time series, and it was much more intuitive in Python?
Had to do with how I was using Sermax models, which are seasonal, autoregressive, integrated moving average models. And it wouldn't allow me to literally run the data back through as a back test, or at least at the time, I couldn't get it to work very well.
Okay.
And what's interesting, on an aside, a different part of it is I actually gave a talk at the Boston R user group on Reticulate. And one of the things I showed is to do a simple facet plot in ggplot. You can do it in 4 lines. To do that in matplotlib, it was like a whole page of code. And I actually showed people, you have to write this much code versus this much to get the same plot. So visualization is key. And I've actually used R in the past, actually in my first job back, like that startup job, to do vector auto regression, because we were forecasting our business using, and it took in 2 inputs. It took in how many salespeople we had, and then, you know, using the time series of the other day, and it actually worked extremely well. Like, it was leads, and or it's basically, think about sales leads and sales. You know, those 2 series are highly integrated. And then we had an extra variable called how many people did we have that day on the floor, and that worked beautifully. Like, the VARS package in R, vector auto regression, gave me the plots. It took a little bit to unwind it, because sometimes you get some weird data types in R that can be challenging, like lists, and so if you do in natural language processing with R, if you do this frequency threshold count function, it's in the TM package. What you'll find is that it tells you, it gives you a paired data that's, you know, word and its frequency. Like, so if you're like if you do text and say, my phrase is customer service, show me all the terms that are correlated with customer service. But when it returns that data type, it's like a tuple that you can't unwind. And you have to do all this unlisting and everything else, and it's so funny.
Yeah, but I wouldn't blame R for that. I would blame the person that wrote the packages. They weren't thinking about using it. Like, one thing that I just stumbled upon was different options for classic Unix commands are different for doing the same thing, are different in different functions, like being recursive. The option letter changes. Because, and then I was watching a YouTube video, and they were saying, well, because they were literally written by different people, and they just didn't talk to each other, so they just didn't bother to think about coordinating and making the options that do the same thing have the same name. And you know, that was way back in the day, and that's just a bad design decision. I mean, it's a people thing, people not talking to each other, but it's also a design thing. And if somebody makes a package and they produce a terrible output, I think I blame it on them, because they haven't thought about what the user should do with this. Like the aggregate function, the base R aggregate drove me nuts, because it produced such a terrible output. And as a young student trying to deal with it, I was like, I have to do so much work for this. And you know, those days are gone, because they kind of have now better syntax and design associated with it. So I don't think that's an R thing. I think it's a design thing.
Yeah, it is. It's a package design thing. I had the same problems way back with aggregate, and you know, subsetting and stuff like that. Was, you know, 5, 6, 7 years ago. It was a challenge. It wasn't a lot of fun. But it's funny with the unpacking the frequency things. A guy came up to me and said, "I've been trying to do that for a year." I was like, "Well, here's the code. It solves all your problems," because that function is so valuable. That frequency, you know, basically it shows the correlation of words in your documents, and it makes a very powerful plot. Like, I always do that. Like, when people say custom experience, or I do it either as a bigram or a trigram, show me all the phrases that are highly correlated with it, and you can see some funny stuff. Like, if you get a rich enough text, you will see some funny phrases.
I see that Alyssa had asked about some examples or use cases or good examples of using R and Python together. And Alyssa, I'm curious if there's specific ones you were looking for.
I mean, so I'm an old school bioinformatician originally, and then come data scientist. And I run a lot of trainings and hackathons and things like that. And so I really try to be language agnostic. And I'm always talking about how cool it is that, for instance, you can use R and Python all in an R notebook, and the inverse, that you can use R and Python in a Jupyter notebook as well. And everyone's always really excited, but then I can never give them good examples, like in the wild, that have actually done this, right? Like, most of the time, if you find a notebook, it's all one language or all the other language. I would love some examples to actually be like, see, I'm not making this up. People really do this.
So one of the things that got me down this route, or actually I was already down it, and I call it a tale of two notebooks, because I was doing something for our marketing guy several years ago, and I was doing it in Python, but you can't give somebody a Jupyter notebook. It just doesn't visualize. And I could have wasted my time copying all the things out and making a PowerPoint deck and everything like that. But I hate doing that because now you're into this really manual, and if you got to redo it. So what I figured out was that I could do my Python in our Markdown, use my tabs, hide all the code, and only show a couple of key graphs and do the Markdown to do like the slides. And he'll get exactly what I want him to get, because I actually gave him the first notebook and I said, look here, 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 here. And of course they don't. And it was totally confused. So it's like, all right, let me change this. And so I began to copy and paste from Jupyter Notebook into our Markdown. There was a learning process there too, because some things don't come across as easily. There are just some subtle differences. And then I knit it all up and nice and clean. It's like, yes, I could have just given him literally like 3 slides with commentary, and I had just no desire to do it in PowerPoint. I was like, I'm not going to go down this route. Like, it's solvable. And I do it a lot for presentation because the Markdown presentation format is the best out there. There's nothing in Python that's as good. So I think about it as ours in our Markdown is just the best way to present anything. And I always use the HTML format with tabs, so it makes it looks like a web page. And I remember doing it. So I was doing an NLP display when I was at Hanover Insurance. So I was text mining all their claims, and I was presenting to the executive team, and it was in my HTML format. So somebody says like, how do I print this out? And I was like, you don't. And then the EA was like, okay. Because part of it, when I do it in that format, it looks like a web application. And that's what I was also showing, like, this is the prototype to a web app. And, see, we have tabs and links just like a web page does. And here's the functionality and here's the display you're going to get. And so it works extremely well at that. And I could probably release a portion of my little time series app, or at least some screenshots from it, so people can see like, hey, this is really just our Markdown wrapped around Python and ggplot visualizations. But
I was looking for the slides for your meetup presentation real quick, but I couldn't find them. But I know that I will, so I can share those too, Alyssa.
Yeah.
But if anyone else has examples too, it'd be great to share those in the chat.
Yeah. As Rick was talking, like, what's interesting is a junior data science that I work with now, he started using R, and then he switched everything to Python, and now he won't use R. And I was like, you can't be that rigid. And I just told him, I said that you're going to find out that you just can't be that rigid. And there's a guy out there, Matt Dancho, who he is, big R guy, incredible teacher. And it's really like, if I get these quick things, like somebody wants a couple of slides or a couple of visualizations with some data tomorrow, I'm doing that in R. And that's what I tell the guy that works for me. I said, I don't care. I am doing this is going to be an R, because I can bang this out in about a couple hours. And I've got a huge amount of base code. It's faster. I can knit it. It's just like, I just told him, if I am doing anything on a quick hit scale, it's going to be an R. Now, if we're looking to build up this giant app or something like that, I may switch it over down the road. Because that's the other thing you run into, like, IT people, they know what Python is, they probably don't know what R is. And we actually ran into this weird situation at Hanover where our IT people wanted everything converted from Python or R into Java. I was like, nah, I don't think so. But someone came up with, there's I guess H2O is able to do it because that's written mostly in Java, so it's able to create the jar files and stuff. And I was like, you know what, that's not happening.
Bryan, as we get to the top of the hour here, I know a few people will have to jump off. So just wanted to ask you, if people have follow-up questions, is LinkedIn the best way to get in contact?
Yeah, that's probably the best way.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I can
Rob
have
can share the link in the chat
Yep.
too. But if it's okay, Bryan, there's a few more questions that came in.
Sure.
You go a few. Okay, awesome. Melissa, I see you asked a quick question on the name of the package that Bryan was referring to on the bigrams or trigrams. Did you want to add anything, Melissa?
No, just hoping to circle back and see what that was called. It sounded like it was pretty handy for NLP.
Yeah, it's embedded in the TM package. And I have the presentation from that talk we did, Rachel, the UseArt at the UseArt conference way back at Slalom. We could probably post a link to GitHub on that, and because there's a ton of code in there, Melissa.
Okay.
It'll show you how to do pretty much anything you could ever want with text mining in R. But it's in the TM package, and it's the problematic one is the find find frequencies, I think it is, where you enter a term and a correlation threshold, and then it finds all the correlated terms. But there's a couple examples in there with the code how to unwind it and everything else. I'll either get Rachel that link to it, or we'll figure out a way to repost that presentation.
I really appreciate that. Thank you all.
Definitely. And Melissa, I can try and send that to you directly as well. If you
And
want
I have the reticulate one too, Rachel, where we did the side-by-side comparison. What does it take to get them working together? And just because I know this is a whole new, people haven't seen that, but it's a lot of hints and tips on how to use reticulate with Python. And I think I even did you can use PyTorch in R Markdown, and we did the neural network training in R Markdown too, and it kind of shows you all the output.
Definitely. Yeah, we can share those.
Yep.
I think Kevin, you had a question around how Bryan enjoys learning new things and what's the next big thing you'll be looking to progress your knowledge in.
So there's two things that I have two work streams in my life. One is fun and one is work. Like literally, so I take courses that will help me with my career, get a better job. And so I've enrolled in PyImage Search, and I'm learning computer vision from really the basics. You start with image processing, because I've done this convolutional neural network that we can figure out cats and dogs and all that stuff, but that's not where the work starts. So that's like one part. And as a kid, growing up, I wanted to make games on an Apple II Plus computer that had, if you think about BASIC and computers back then, it had 48K of RAM. So I learned assembly language to do it, and made a little missile command game. So I'm actually relearning assembly language now. And it's really fascinating. So I took a first course on how to design a CPU from scratch. And it was just mind-blowing and really opening. Like, you design your first memory gate and NAND gates and things, and at the end we have a working 16-bit computer, and then assembly language. And I am about to take a class in assembly language to build games on an Atari 2600. I know it's like wicked old school, but it's fun. And it really, learning assembly language really teaches you the guts of how a computer works. And so that's my little fun project along the way. And it's happening slowly in phases. Like I said, I did the CPU first. I took one level of assembly language refresh, and wow, And now I'm on like 2 and 3. I got 2 more to come through it to make some games.
Awesome. I know Hugh had to drop, but I really like this question as well. But Hugh asked, do you have any tips for communicating complex issues through simple or easy digestible techniques?
One is find the simplest visual for it first. Like one of my chemistry professors back in college used to always talk about it, call them football player analogies. Like the analogy is so easy, even a football player can understand it. And so, and it's got to be visual. So think about it as your first step is a simple visual. Don't try to put everything out there at once. And that's really, you know, find the simplest visual you can give them to start the conversation. You don't have to sell it all in one shot.
And is that usually through like our Markdown, or how do you share those?
I actually do that now as much as I can. Like I did the whole the design for what an NLP application would look like processing our claims notes, and like it was a little almost like flowcharting diagrams and things in our Markdown. And people could easily follow it. Like, here's an example of a bigram, you know, and stuff like that. You know, this is why we use, one of them was, why do we use MongoDB for this rather than a regular one? And things like that, where you can show very simple concepts that solve the problems and explain what problem you're solving. And I think that's the 2 things with that visual. The visual should explain what it is, but it also should explain why it solves your problem. So some people just say, why?
Yeah. Let's see. I see there are a few other questions I just want to make sure we get to and not keep you over too long, Bryan. But there was an anonymous question that was, is it possible to practice leadership skills in all or most organizations? Or are there any work environments that are too broken to develop as a leader?
I think you can in every organization. No, just looking at it, one of my little kitties is trying to get out of my office here. So I said to make sure the door was open so she could get out. I don't know if an organization is too broken. I mean, I've been able to practice in any organization. Some of them I've only lasted 1 year though. So, you know, you got to take that, you can take that with a grain of salt. So, you know, there have been a lot of companies, there have been a handful of companies, I won't say a lot, that I've only spent 1 year with them for whatever reason. Either they've made it clear that I don't fit, I don't have a career, or there's no way I'm ever gonna convince them that, you know, data science or something is the way to go, even though I'm making results for them. They're not recognizing the strength of it. And so sometimes, you know, your answer is to find somewhere else to go. And I think as data science people, if you're on top of your game, it shouldn't be that hard to do if that's the decision you have to make. So
thank you. And we do appreciate cats on the Data Science Hangout as well, if you want to put the cat up.
No, she slipped out the door.
One other question too I want to ask you, Bryan, and trying to ask this every week, but are there certain like podcasts or things that you read that you would recommend to others?
Well, one of the things is I'm actually a reasonably active person on Stack Overflow, so I get Stack Overflow weekly. I get another one is the Super Data Science team. They sponsored this thing called DS Go. It's a big networking career fair, but and they get all the best people. They get the Ben Taylors, the Matt Danchos, pretty much anybody, Kate Strackno, any major data science person that you've seen on LinkedIn, they seem to be able to get them to do something. So I sort of follow that. It's more like I follow people versus like blogs. So again, the super data science team always brings on interesting people, and I regularly read the NVIDIA because I get a specialized user thing for that, just to keep my fingers in the latest AI stuff.
Cool. And I would definitely recommend following Bryan, because I feel like I've met so many people from seeing your comments on other people's posts.
I have to say, I really like LinkedIn. Like, the funny thing is, I am no longer on Facebook. I haven't been on Facebook for almost 10 years now. I got rid of Twitter about 5 years ago, because the only reason why I had it was so I could do a dev account and scrape Twitter feeds for marketing. But I just got tired of just, it felt like a cesspool. And it was kind of depressing. So I got rid of that. But LinkedIn is still, to me, a great environment. And follow people, read people, post some amazing stuff. And when you find there is a probably select 10 people out there that are fantastic to follow along with. I can pull a list for you this isn't through Meetup, so I'll have to get you something that you can post, like
we're gonna figure that out, like making a landing page so that we can share resources with everyone and have a home base.
Yeah, because there's this guy, I think his name is Tanner and R, something like that. He posts a lot, like, amazing stuff. Obviously Ben Taylor is the philosopher of AI. Matt Dancho is fantastic for, like, how do you be applied. Yet Kate, she's her dedicated feed is really good. I'm trying to think of some of the other people out there, but there's a Joe Reese is another one.
Definitely.
Yeah, because not everybody is as active as some of these people. So you'll get like a regular, it's almost like you get a regular sort of feed of information from them. That's useful and interesting.
For sure. Yeah, I've been starting to see a lot more, and maybe it's based on what I'm looking at, but more about like data storytelling as well.
Yep. That is probably one of the most important things a person can learn as a data scientist, how to tell a story. You can't just, put a presentation that has a million charts and not weave a story together. In fact, that's one of the things that I'm teaching my junior guy, like how to put slides and how do you title a slide and all these little things so that you're telling a story. Like way back when I used to work at Liberty, I used to do a lot of work for our CEO, and we'd come in with a PowerPoint deck and he'd literally just flip through it like a cartoon, and look for the back slide. So, but what I made sure is that if he flipped through it slow enough and all he read was the headline on each thing, he would have a storyline. But data storytelling it's everything, because if you can't tell the story, no one's going to pay attention to it.
That's a new podcast I just found, and I think it was Storytelling with Data.
I think I've seen that. I've seen a post for that.
Yeah. Just want to check if anyone has any other questions and make sure that I didn't miss anything that was on Slido or the chat. Try and count 5 seconds. I'm really bad at silence, but thank you so much, Bryan, for jumping on and sharing your insights with us. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining too.
Thanks for the invite, Rachel, and thanks for everybody for tuning in and listen. Appreciate that.
And Bryan will be at a meetup soon. We still got to figure that one out, right?
Yeah, we still got the marketing one, and there was one other we're gonna do too. So
awesome. Well, thank you, Bryan. Have a great rest of the day, everyone.